Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 19 of Tell Your Story, the podcast that was created based after my book, Stories from Web, and the whole hope of sharing other people's stories with you, and so that you can catch a glimpse into their lives and maybe see pieces of their story that inspire you to continue telling yours. I'm super thrilled this week to have my special guest, Chris Ruden. Chris, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell everybody kind of who you are?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Chris Ruden. I am probably the only seven-fingered type 1 diabetic, record-holding powerlifter, motivational speaker, and social media entrepreneur that you know. And if I'm not, I promise you, I have to be because I made that up. I was born with a physical disability. I was born with a congenital birth defect, leaving me with two fingers on my left hand and a shorter left arm. I also have an autoimmune disease, type 1 diabetes. And I travel the country talking to kids, students, adults about overcoming limitations, as well as nutritional seminars and all that. So I do a smorgasbord of things just to give as much value and impact as many people as I can personally.
Right. So you mentioned right off the top that you were born with a congenital birth defect. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, how common is it?
So the biggest minority in the world is people with disabilities. That's the biggest minority in the world. Now, in terms of upper limb, residual limb effects, upper limb disabilities are they're not common at all compared to lower limb. So I was born with two fingers on my left hand and a shorter left arm. I actually take my prosthetic off to show people. Two fingers on my left hand, shorter left arm. I'm missing most of the bones in my hand, and the joint is not fused together properly, so it's a little shorter. And yeah, that's just how I was born. There was no one around me that had a disability, let alone something similar to myself. So of course, growing up, I thought I was alone.
Right.
I thought I had nothing. You add diabetes to the mix, I'm like, what the heck is going on? I thought diabetes was for people who are overweight. A lot of misconceptions, a lot of stigmas behind, disability and diabetes. And like, wow, I'm just collecting everything,
Mm-hmm.
But growing up with a disability, I knew immediately that I was different.
Mm-hmm. So were you born with diabetes as well, or is that something that just came later on?
I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 19 years old, it used to be uncommon, but now it's getting more and more common among younger teens and younger adults. So it's no longer called juvenile diabetes as it used to be. It's just type 1 diabetes. So big distinction between type 1 and type 2. And my job is to help people understand that, educate the population, and also help people who are going through the condition.
So when you were growing up, were there any other people with any physical disabilities that you grew up around, or were you the only one that you saw like yourself?
I grew up in a pretty poor area, so I went to the local schools, and no one else that I knew had similar scenarios. My parents tried to help me, by help I mean shelter me, as much as possible, putting me through religious schools to try and keep me in a tight bubble. But I struggled a lot because I was different. I was the only person who had a physical disability. It's funny, back then I felt so different, and that was a bad thing. Now I feel so different, and it's the best thing of my life. It separates me from everyone else. And I also realized that, wow, everyone's different. It's okay. We're allowed to be different because no one is the same, So it's a completely different perspective now. But when I was younger, it was tough.
Did you deal with a lot of bullying, or was it something that you just grew up around everybody else and they were all used to it?
Everyone was used to it in my local neighborhood, but when I started going to school and changing schools, I got bullied a lot. To be honest, some of the most traumatic stuff I've ever gone through in my life was because of bullying. There was this girl named Crystal who I thought she was the prettiest girl in school, and I wanted to ask her out. I was like 12 or 13. I didn't know any better. So I told my friends, I'm going to go ask her. I'm going to go in front of everyone. I'm going to ask her. I started walking up to her. I look back at my friends, and they all start laughing. I'm like, guys, what are you laughing about? What's so funny? And I turn around, and she had the stapler, and she's making fun of my hand, like a crab claw, and to my face. And then the whole class is laughing at me. Like, imagine, put yourself in a scenario where you thought you were going to take a pretty girl out or a pretty person out, and that person's making fun of you. Now all your friends are even laughing at you because of something you can't control.
Right.
I hid my bullying from my parents. I never told them. I was embarrassed. Instead of being feeling bullied or feeling depressed. I felt that, but I was more embarrassed that I was being bullied, so I didn't tell my parents. You know, that was the hardest thing to deal with as a kid, is trying to hold it in.
Did there ever become did talk to your parents?
So up until I was about 14, I didn't tell them, but there was one specific day where this kid just would not leave me alone, like constantly made me feel like a monster. Like he never picked me in recess and all this stuff. And he would always go, "Oh, Chris is a monster. They'll run away from him," you know? And I was always trying to be like difficult. Like, I'm like, "Oh no, I'm stronger than that." It hurt, you know? And one specific day I remember going home and I was so frustrated that I threw my backpack across the floor and I ran to the bathroom. I just looked in the mirror. I'm like, you are a monster. And my mom knew. My mom knew something was wrong. She asked me, and I always hid it. But that day, I lost it. So I was like, "Mom," she was a nurse. And she's like, "Mom," I said, "I don't want to have this anymore. I want a normal hand. I don't want to be a monster. I'm tired of kids not playing with me. Mom, fix this. You're a nurse. Make me a normal kid." And I'll never forget what my mom said. She broke down. She cried hysterically, and all she could do was sobbing. She hugged me and she said, "I'm sorry." And like that moment right there, I knew I couldn't do anything about my situation. I knew I had to do something else. I wasn't sure at the time. I wasn't mature enough or, intellectually developed enough to understand what needed to be done. But I knew I could never have my mom feel that way again. I could never put someone in a scenario to feel like it's their responsibility for what circumstance I'm going through. It's my responsibility and how I react. So I eventually learned that mindset, but at the time it was difficult.
Now, just a while ago, you were wearing a prosthetic. When did you decide to bring a prosthetic into the mix?
Man, if that's not bad enough, and I hate trying to show people that I had it bad. I hate that. I can't stand it because everyone has the same story. We go through some crap, we get over some crap, and there's some more crap coming. Like everyone has the same story. But I got this prosthetic, super fancy. I got that a year ago. For 17 years, I wore a glove on this hand.
Uh-huh.
I just took it off last November.
Really?
For 17 years, I hid my hand. Uh-huh. Now, I did all kinds of cool stuff. I taught breakdancing classes. I learned how to play drums and played for 4 years. I slid a drumstick through the finger hole of a glove and played drums competitively. I did all this cool stuff, but I was hiding in plain sight.
Right.
My girlfriend now, we've been together for 4 years. For 3 years, she didn't see my hand. I had my hand in a glove for 3 years of that relationship, 17 years total. Mm-hmm. After that girl in school made fun of me, I shoved my hand in my pocket. Mm-hmm. And I kept my hand in my pocket for 2 years. During PE, when I would run, hand in my pocket. When I played basketball, hand in my pocket. When I went home, hand in my pocket. Until I was in my room, then I could take my hand out of my pocket. From there, progressed to the glove, 17 years with that. And then when I finally got this prosthetic, I told myself, if I get a prosthetic arm, I am going to stop wearing the glove. I'm going to open up. I kind of hoped I'd never get the prosthetic, so it was like a thing that would never come true. But when the day came down, I was like, I need to do it. I made a video. I was like, the best way to do it for me, I'm getting a social media following. That's like my whole career from social media. I was like, I'm going to make a video. I'm going to put it out on the internet, and I'm just going to close my eyes and hope people don't, hate me or fear me or anything like that. The video went viral.
Yeah.
Right now, it just hit 2.4 million views.
Wow.
And I got posted on Washington Post and every other major publication showing that I just was vulnerable. People see me, oh, you have muscle, all this stuff. Everyone is exposed or has the potential to face depression, anxiety, mental issues, The disability itself is not the hard part. It's the mental stuff behind it, It's the dealing with the tediousness of being different and seeing how people react. Got to learn to be okay with it,
So what do you think really the turning point for you to want to make that step into a prosthetic? Was it just you wanted something different for yourself, or?
So I started speaking. I'm a professional speaker now, so I travel all around the country. It's one of my main forms of income and also my goal in life. If you see like some of my old security questions, it's crazy to think back. It was like, what's your dream job? And it said speaker. And I'm like, oh my God, that's me now.
Uh-huh.
But the turning point was when I started speaking to kids. I knew I was still hiding. I was speaking to kids and I still had my glove on. I'm teaching them to overcome limitations that I haven't overcome yet. Part of that showed that I'm human and I'm not perfect, you know? But also I was hiding in plain sight again, like I've done my whole life. So I knew at some point I needed to take it off. I'm a very goal-oriented person. I'm competitive. I've gotten my records and done all the stuff that I'm doing now by setting goals and accomplishing them. Even if I don't want to, even if it's not comfortable, I'm like, all right, if this happens, I'm going to do this. And when that happened, I just had to do it.
So, you mentioned that you've had a girlfriend for 4 years now, and for several years in that relationship, she never saw your hand because you kept a glove on. What was that moment like for you when, you talk about how you did that because of this experience in middle school? So for you to overcome that, I think that may have been probably the hardest thing for you, in that fear of she's going to leave or laugh or something. What was that moment like, the moment you let her see all of you for the first time?
Honestly, it's a little different because when I got to the point where I was going to take my glove off, I knew that it was me. I knew that it's not a surprise. If I wear a glove, something's up. You can see it. It's like wearing a clear mask. Like I can see your face. So when I finally did it, it was more of not being afraid of her reaction, but that weight is lifted off me, that I don't have to hide anymore. And the second she saw it and didn't react, I was like, why was I doing this? Why was I hiding? The hardest thing ever, it was a great year. Last year was a great year because I accomplished so many different feats and hit so many records. In front of 20,000 people, I broke a unofficial world record, but that was nothing compared to being able to take my glove off and go to the grocery store.
Right.
To feel comfortable enough to go to a mall. It was so uncomfortable. I'm not even gonna lie. The first few times where I'm like, everyone's staring at me. Everyone was staring at me before. I just didn't notice it. Now I'm like, all right, I have to accept that. Yes, I am different. People are going to look. Curiosity is going to get the best of them, and it's going to happen. But now I'm okay with it. Now I'm okay with me. And it took a lot of time to get to this point. But now, of course, I look back and I'm like, I wish I would have done it a long time ago.
Do you still find yourself having those moments of insecurity today?
Very rarely. It's like for a split second, and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm fine. Like I used to, when I first got the prosthetic, I almost started switching, from glove to like just wearing prosthetic all the time.
Right.
And I was like, I can't do that. Can't fall into that trap again. Believe it or not, a YouTube comment said something like that. They're like, be careful you don't switch your glove for your prosthetic. I'm like, dude, I don't even know you. And that's super like philosophical of you. Like, it was right. He was true. He was right. So now I'm fine. I have no qualms whatsoever about going anywhere, whether I have a prosthetic or not.
You are really well known now for the kind of weightlifting you do, and how your disability does not get in the way from you doing that and doing it successfully. Was weightlifting always something that you wanted to do?
Not at all. When I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I wanted to do it. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do political science. I just wanted to be a lawyer. I had no interest in fitness whatsoever. And the second I was diagnosed, I was like, all right, I need to do something. I need to take my health seriously. I ended up going to the gym with a buddy of mine. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then he said the thing is like, yeah, I want to bodybuild, but I don't know if you can because you're not symmetrical. I'm a super competitive person, like extremely competitive. Like I'm the kind of person that walks faster than the person next to me, even if they don't know we're racing, I'm winning. Like I'm that person. So I took that as a challenge. I started trying to bodybuild. I was getting stronger in the meantime. I fell in love with weightlifting because a friend invited me to do a powerlifting meet. I'm like, I don't really do that. I did my first powerlifting meet and I won. Yeah. I won best lifter. I won all this stuff. I was like, wow, this was awesome. And for 5-6 years after that, I was competing. I competed in about 7 different meets, won 6 of them, and I compete against normal, non-disabled people. I love it. I absolutely love weightlifting because it teaches me how to deal with failure regularly and how to fail forward. And it's a challenge. It's crazy to lift a weight you couldn't lift last week this week,
So, do you deal often with people trying to discredit you or count you out because of your disability? And then, I mean, from the little bit that I've got to talk with you, I kind of feel like you would use that as fuel to be like, watch this, I'm going to show you.
So on multiple parts, I've had some issues. On the first part, people saying you can't, I've heard that so many times that I'm like, no one would even say that to me at this point because of everything I've accomplished. But people wait until you're successful to say, I always believed in you. But in the beginning, they didn't, you know? On the flip side of that, I got some backlash because when I started lifting, everyone's like, oh my God, you're so inspirational, so motivational. That's awesome. And then I started beating those people. And they're like, whoa, 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 this isn't as motivational anymore. I think you're cheating because you're using a hook. You know, so I got that aspect of it too. And almost every pro or Paralympic athlete has gotten in some issues with, you know, prosthetics or whatever they use to compete. People are like, oh, they have an unfair advantage. Like, limb loss is not an unfair advantage.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had stuff on both sides, but at the end of the day, I do this for me. I do this for all the kids who think they can't. You know, I do this for the kids and people who are labeled disabled. You know, some of the synonyms for disabled: weak, broken, useless, helpless. Like, can you imagine being labeled that? I was lucky, fortunate enough to not do something bad. You know, like I fell to some bad stuff, but there are kids who want to take their life because of those kind of labels, you know, because they're convinced that that's true. And my job is to convince them that it's not.
Yeah, you know, and I think that leads great to my next question is you do a lot of speaking and with all kinds of organizations, but with kids too. And you know, you said that used to be one of your security questions because you always knew that that's what you wanted to do. What do you think is probably the biggest thing that you've learned going out and speaking to others?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing I've learned from speaking to people, kids, everyone, is that it is selfish to not share your message.
Mm.
Whether you have one piece of advice or 100, it is so selfish to withhold your value from society, from the world. You know, everyone has something to give, some sort of value, some sort of impact. And people are like, I don't have a good enough story. You know, I'm not good enough. I haven't done anything crazy. I haven't done anything cool. The smallest impact in someone's life can make them impact thousands and thousands of people. It can go so far, but it will never happen because you didn't think you could. You know, that self-imposed limitation, like I talked about earlier, you impose that on yourself, you know? So the biggest thing I've learned from speaking is share your message, learn to deliver your message, communicate effectively, tell a good story. You know, like I said, everyone has the same story, but if you can craft it in a way that can change one person's life,
Right.
You made an impact on society and society to come from whatever they do with your message.
Right. Well, you know, and one thing that you really are passionate about, you mean, I know you mentioned it earlier, but you found out at 19 that you had diabetes, and you really are a voice for diabetes. When you found that out, I mean, I'm sure when you first found out, it was kind of like another hit to the face of one more thing that I'm trying to deal with here. When did you decide to take that and use it as another platform of I'm going to speak out and educate people about this?
Immediately. Immediately. So my entire life I dealt with my disability, and that took years, like all the way up until last year. So the second I was diagnosed with diabetes, I was like, I am not going to let this thing be like the past 19 years. You know, I'm not going to let this thing, you know, be the stuff that breaks my back. So I was like, what can I do with where I'm at right now? You know, I started talking to people on online forums, of diabetes forums and Facebook groups, and reaching out to the groups that were already there. I'm like, oh crap, this is awesome. I don't know any diabetics in person, but there's people online I can talk to. I get invited to speak at an event. I've never spoken at an event before. I'll help, but I have no clue what I'm doing. I did it, fell in love with speaking. I was like, oh, I can do this. I started learning how to speak more effectively, going to stuff like Toastmasters and going to these classes. And then now it's just diabetes, that obstacle is now the opportunity of my career, you know? So I don't think diabetes is a good or bad thing. A lot of people will say a traumatic event changed their life. I like to take responsibility. So I say, diabetes just is. I just made the right decisions around what is, you know?
And you've also got this killer diabetes donut tattoo.
Oh, yeah, I got that on my leg. I'm known as the donut guy in the diabetes space because there's so many preconceived notions about diabetes. Like, you're not allowed to eat certain foods. There's only 2 reasons you shouldn't be allowed to eat food. You have leprosy, you probably don't have leprosy. And 2, there's poison. No one should eat poison. We can't produce insulin, okay? And we take it exogenously on the outside of our body. You can produce insulin. It happens on the inside of your body. We just do the stuff on the outside. That's fine. We can eat whatever we want. Now, we're not, immune to calories. So yes, eating too much can cause you to gain weight. That's just like a normal person, So the only limitations are ones people set. People kind of operate out of fear, And I get a lot of parents who will message me. They say, you're not supposed to eat that because too much of that will kill you. And I'm like, okay, you'll never get in a car accident if you never own a car.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to operate your entire life on that perspective,
Right.
And just because you're, not enjoying yourself, I don't eat donuts all day, The reality of it is I'll have one every once in a while, But you're allowed to do that. We're allowed to have a quality of life. We're not living for our condition. We're not living for work. We're not living for disease or disability or insecurity or anxiety or depression or any of these things you're battling. You're not living for them. You're living with them. It's like an annoying roommate that you signed a really long lease with, and you got to learn to live along with. That's how I compare it. And you can learn to manage and still have a relatively good time.
I like that. I think that's great that you're educating people about diabetes, about disabilities, that you're owning it, you're standing up proudly and speaking about it publicly, because I think that's where you really begin to tear down walls and really let people see the human side of all these things that they could just believe other things about. A lot of the listeners and viewers for this series and my other series are educators. When you were growing up in school, can you think of any educators that made a big impact on you?
Let me see. There was one teacher in high school that I still have to talk to her. I did like an article, a newspaper did an article on me and I mentioned her, but I have to go back to her. She pretty much like a wizard predicted what I was going to do. And I was like, no way. At the time, I was like, I'm going to be an epidemiologist. I don't even know what that means, but it's a big word and I'm going to do it because it sounds cool, And she was like, I think you're going to be involved in health, some sort of health field. And I think you're going to speak to people about it and you're going to inspire a lot of people. And I was like, nah, I just want to do research. I want to do lawyer, maybe that, She called it. And I'm like, what? She always helped me. She used me for different examples. And she was just so supportive of me as a person, She never said, you need to take your glove off. She never said, stop hiding. She just said, you're a great person and embraced who I was, regardless of my insecurities or what I was dealing with. So teachers, they have the best job in the world. Obviously, they should be rewarded so much. And that's
Chris, you want to continue?
Yeah. So as I was saying, teachers are extremely underpaid, and that's like a super common thing. Everyone talks about that. But mental health in today's society is just so underrated, and it's ignored. Everyone talks about the medications. They talk about all the things you can do and the things you can buy, but they don't talk about the daily struggles. That's the hardest part of all these of life, is just learning to deal with what's going on and learning to develop the right mindset. And that's what I see from successful to non-successful people, or happy or non-happy people, is the way they think, not what they have or what they've learned or anything like that. It's the way they think. And we don't talk much about it, which sucks, but teachers have the ability to influence. And that's such an important part, to connect, to not see people as student one or student two, but to see me as Chris, not the disabled kid, just Chris.
Yeah. Well, before I get to my last question, one more thing I wanted to ask you is, you have quite the social media following now. Do you view that as a really big responsibility to reflect honestly and openly because the following is so large now, or does that not even matter or even comprehend to you? Or
So I'm super fortunate to have gotten to this point of having a following on some accounts, but I try and maintain my authenticity. I want to show people who I am, the good and the bad, not just the highlight reel. A lot of social media is just a highlight reel, and people get depressed because of it. I show the good numbers, the bad numbers, the highs, the lows. I show everything because I want people to understand that I'm a real person. You know, I don't want people to put me on a pedestal and think otherwise. When I go to events, I spend extra hours, if not extra days, hanging out with the people, with the kids after I talk to them, or hang out with the adults, going to the after night, you know, the parties with them, and really enjoying the time. And I've had so many organizers ask me, like, why do you do that? No other speaker has ever done that before. I'm like, why wouldn't you? I'm so fortunate enough that to have one person willing to listen to me, let alone to have hundreds, thousands of people wanting to hear what I'm saying and actually let it impact them and for them to do something with that, you know? So it's the least I could do. It's what I enjoy doing. Impact doesn't start and stop on stage. You know, impact is real. Like stuff like this. You talking to people, getting people's stories impacts people's lives. And as much or as little as you know, it does. And it's going to help someone somewhere. And that's motivation for me.
Well, and I love that you want to highlight. You want to share the successes, but you want to share the struggles as well, because that's what people need to see, that none of us are claiming to be perfect. We all are struggling and dealing with different things. And when we do that openly, I feel like exactly what you said, we inspire more people to feel less alone.
Yeah.
So, Chris, the question I want to kind of end on tonight is, if there was one thing that you wish more people knew, what would you wish that was?
I wish they knew that their potential was so much more than they could ever fathom. If not, it's unfathomable. Potential, it's almost a dumb word, to be honest, because potential is what you make of it. You know, you can't say someone's potential stops here when they have the ability to keep going, you know? So don't underestimate your potential. Be willing to put in the work. Understand that waiting for motivation is pointless. You know, people ask me, how do you stay motivated? That's the wrong question. You need to ask, how do you develop the discipline to do what you need to do, even when you don't feel like doing it? That's the right question to ask. When you don't doubt your potential, you have the action to do the things, which motivates you to keep doing the things, you know? So never doubt your potential.
I love that. Well, Chris, I know that you are crazy busy, and so the fact that you agreed to come on, I was so thrilled, because I've been following your social media accounts and just been really inspired by you and what you're sharing out there and everything. So I want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing a piece of your story with my audience as well.
I want to say more than thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for giving your time to people you don't even know and having an impact that will just change people's lives on whatever scale. So understand what you're doing is amazing, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, Chris. And for those of y'all listening or watching today, thank you for joining another episode of Tell Your Story. Make sure you join us every week, as each week I bring you a new guest that hopefully will inspire and encourage you to get out there and be brave enough to tell your story. Have a great night, everybody.